5 years ago, I kissed a silver urn holding dirt from a roadside where my sister supposedly died. Last week, I saw her, breathing and laughing, wearing a diamond that wasn't hers and locking lips with the one man I thought I could trust, my husband, Marcus, outside a penthouse suite. The scent of her familiar gardenia perfume hit me, sharp and cold, confirming the impossible truth. My grief was a fraud, my marriage a joke, and my dead sister was suddenly alive and well, enjoying a life she stole from me. Why the elaborate death, and what kind of twisted deal did she make with my husband to bury my heart along with an empty casket? Before we go to the full story, please tell me from where you are watching, tell me in comments, like the video and subscribe for more videos. The silence in the taxi was so loud it felt like a physical assault, a vacuum sucking the air from my lungs and leaving only the metallic taste of pure, unadulterated shock. Doreen, the dependable, steady 58-year-old pillar of her community, felt her foundation crumbling, turning her world into a kaleidoscope of betrayal. The image of Savannah's vibrant face, free from the grief I carried daily, her lips locked with Marcus's, played on an endless loop behind my eyelids. It was a scene of such audacious cruelty that it eclipsed the 5 years of mourning I had endured. I had worn black, recited eulogies, and cried until my tear ducts were dry for a ghost who was, in fact, living large, enjoying the spoils of my stability. My focus narrowed instantly from the emotional catastrophe to the need for clinical, undeniable evidence. I needed to know the details of their arrangement, not just the kisses, but the logistics of the lie that cost me half a decade of peace. My mind, usually prone to compassionate delay, was now sharp and weaponized. I instructed the driver to take me to Marcus's downtown office, a place I rarely visited, because I knew he kept a secondary, encrypted laptop there, one he claimed was for proprietary client data, but which, in retrospect, smelled suspiciously like a hub for hidden activities. The key was disguised as a luxury pen on his desk. The firm's security was easily bypassed using the code I set up years ago for after-hours emergency access, a code he never changed because he assumed I wouldn't use it against him. Assumption, I noted bitterly, is the mother of all foolishness. As I walked through the silent, cold marble halls of his corporate sanctuary, every award and framed photo of our smiling family seemed to mock my naivete. The deeper I went into his professional space, the more the pieces of the puzzle began to click into a sinister whole. I remembered the odd wire transfers he'd been making, claiming they were off-book investments that required secrecy, and a sinking feeling told me those funds weren't feeding a passive portfolio but fueling my sister's luxurious second chance. I located the hidden laptop, its familiar smooth casing chilling beneath my fingertips. The login prompt stared back at me, demanding a password. I tried our wedding anniversary, his mother's birthday, the name of our first dog, all standard, sentimental passwords that failed immediately. This betrayal, I realized, was colder than I thought. He hadn't just cheated, he had completely compartmentalized his life, creating firewalls between the man I loved and the criminal he had become. Then, a chilling thought, what if the password wasn't based on our life? What if it was based on theirs? A quick guess, using Savannah's birthday, locked the screen immediately, confirming a deeper level of entanglement than I'd feared. My heart constricted with a new spike of anguish and rage. I slumped back in his plush leather chair, staring at the locked screen, knowing the key to my freedom, and his destruction, was just a few more attempts away. But what if the next guess triggered a security alert, blowing my cover before I had a single shred of proof? My fingers trembled above the keyboard, debating the next logical password, the date of her death. But that was the day she chose to die, the day they consecrated their twisted conspiracy, so it held a different kind of importance for them. I typed in the 5-year anniversary of her funeral, and the screen flashed green, welcoming me into a labyrinth of deceit. The access was immediate, and the sheer volume of data confirmed my worst suspicions. This wasn't just a clandestine rendezvous, this was a fully operational, shared life. The laptop's desktop was clean, but a hidden folder, labeled Atlas Project, contained everything. It held detailed spreadsheets outlining quarterly offshore disbursements, large sums of money moved through a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands, perfectly matching the amounts Marcus had dismissed as risky but necessary investments. The beneficiary? An entity simply named Savannah Consulting, a clever, almost insolent play on Savannah's name. But the financial documents were just the backdrop. The real emotional dagger came from the files nestled beneath, folders labeled Future and ASA. Future contained architect blueprints and renderings for a sprawling modern villa on the Amalfi Coast, complete with a private dock and 2 distinct master suites. The sickening realization dawned: they weren't planning a weekend getaway, they were planning a retirement, our retirement, with her in my place. The ASA folder was filled with personal photographs, not grainy security shots, but tender, intimate pictures: Savannah and Marcus, laughing on a sailboat, Savannah holding a small, silver locket, identical to the one I gave her, supposedly lost in the crash. Yet visibly new and polished, and, most devastatingly, a photograph of Savannah holding a newborn baby, its face obscured by a protective, loving hand, a hand that was unmistakably Marcus's. The child must be a few months old, and the date stamp on the photo was just last Christmas. I had been grieving the loss of my sister, supporting the man who was secretly building a new family, a secret legacy, while I was left only with the cold remnants of a lie. The financial betrayal was one thing, but the baby was a devastating, unforeseen blow that splintered my reality completely, forcing a desperate question into my mind. Was the purpose of Savannah's fake death not just to escape a problem, but to secure the legitimacy of an illegitimate child Marcus could never acknowledge while married to me? I slumped over the keyboard, the screen illuminating my tear-streaked face. How many more years of planning, how many more lies, until they had simply vanished and left me with the wreckage? The photographs, especially the one of the baby, turned my measured need for revenge into an urgent, searing necessity. I quickly copied all the data to a small, encrypted USB drive I carried, my hands moving with a clarity born of absolute desperation. I wiped the laptop's history and returned the key pen, praying my sudden, aggressive digital foray hadn't left any trace. But as I was about to leave, I noticed a tiny, almost invisible scratch on the keyboard's metallic surface, shaped like a stylized letter L, a small detail I recognized instantly. It was the same distinctive signature scratch Savannah used to leave on all her possessions when we were children, a habit I thought she'd outgrown. She had been here, in Marcus's office, not just sharing his bed, but his workspace, leaving a trace only I would recognize. What deeper secret did that tiny, arrogant scratch conceal, and why was she so brazen as to leave a clue only I could decipher? A subtle provocation suggesting she knew I was watching, or perhaps, that she wanted to be found? The scratch, tiny but utterly devastating, felt like Savannah whispering a cruel challenge across the 5-year chasm of her calculated absence. It solidified the fact that this wasn't a secret life hidden from me, but a performance designed for me, a masterpiece of manipulation where my grief was the central, mocked theme. I left the office like a thief in the night, the USB drive warm in my pocket, the weight of the baby photo pressing down on my soul. My immediate need was space to process the visual and financial evidence, but the ache in my chest was so profound I couldn't drive home. Instead, I drove to the one place that represented the definitive end of Savannah's life, the cemetery, specifically the grand, polished granite marker bearing her name and the dates of a life that hadn't actually ended. Standing before the beautiful, expensive tombstone, which Marcus insisted on paying for and designing himself, I felt a violent urge to smash the stone, to expose the lie beneath the meticulously manicured grass. I remembered the day the stone was placed, Marcus standing next to me, his hand on my back, comforting me while he was silently celebrating the success of his deception. He even cried, convincingly, beautifully, a performance worthy of an Oscar. Now, every drop of my genuine mourning felt poisoned, a tribute to their successful deception. I ran my fingers over the cold granite, and something felt subtly wrong beneath the surface. It wasn't the texture of the stone, which was smooth, but the ground directly in front of it. It felt unnaturally firm, almost hollow. My investigative instincts, sharpened by rage, kicked in. Using the heel of my stiletto, I gently scraped away the top layer of earth. Beneath the thin soil, I didn't find more dirt. I found the edge of a small, rectangular concrete slab, deliberately placed and covered. It wasn't part of the cemetery's standard landscaping. A surge of frantic energy pulsed through me, overwhelming the pain. I used my umbrella and my hands, frantically digging and sweeping away the loose soil until the slab was visible, revealing a small, brass-plated ring handle embedded flush with the concrete. This wasn't a grave, this was a vault, a secret compartment directly beneath the monument to my sister's fabricated death. Marcus had insisted on this particular plot, claiming it had a better view of the sunset. Now, the view seemed less important than what it concealed. He hadn't just faked her death, he had used the grave site as a lockbox, a physical repository for some deep, central component of their conspiracy, something too critical or too dangerous to keep in his office or their future villa. The irony was suffocating. I had wept over a monument that was actually a monument to my husband's villainy. But I couldn't open it here, not in broad daylight in the silent, watchful cemetery. I needed tools, privacy, and time. I quickly recovered the concrete slab with dirt and smoothed the surface, my agitation masked by the posture of a grieving widow adjusting the flowers. As I turned to leave, a sleek, black sedan, a make and model I didn't recognize, pulled slowly past the neighboring plots, its tinted windows deliberately obscuring the driver's face, but not before I caught the glint of a brief, intense reflection from inside the car, directed right at me. It felt too deliberate, too knowing, to be a random visitor. Had I been followed from the office? Was the simple, arrogant elf scratch in Marcus's office not just a taunt from Savannah, but a signal to an accomplice who was now tracking my movements, alerted that the grieving widow was starting to dig? The car sped up abruptly and disappeared, leaving me standing alone, frozen in the stillness of the cemetery, terrified that they didn't just share a bed, a baby, and a retirement plan, but also a dangerous network of people who were now actively watching me, waiting for me to make the next move, which could be my last. The fear was a cold, necessary shot of adrenaline, reminding me that this was no longer a domestic drama but a high-stakes investigation where my life might actually be at risk. I raced home, my mind formulating a plan of action with terrifying speed and precision. I had the digital evidence, and now I needed the physical key to the lockbox under the tombstone. I knew Marcus had a collection of antique skeleton keys in a small glass display case in his study, a hobby he shared with his father, who collected them from historical buildings he renovated. I found the case, but the key he would use for a heavy brass ring handle would be distinct, heavier, more ornate, and likely missing from the set. Scanning the rows, I immediately spotted the gap, a space where a large, iron-ringed key, which Marcus always called the Janus key, after the two-faced Roman god of beginnings and endings, should have been. It wasn't in the case, but Marcus was meticulously neat, and he wouldn't simply leave it lying around. I remembered he'd once complained about a small, antique Chinese puzzle box on his nightstand that was too complex to open. He had thrown his most annoying pieces of clutter into it, intending to deal with them later. With renewed hope, I opened the puzzle box and, nestled among old cufflink receipts and foreign coins, I found the Janus key. It was heavier than expected, the brass warm from being handled, suggesting recent use. Clutching the key in the USB drive, I realized I was holding the two primary levers of my revenge, the digital blueprint of their financial crimes and the physical key to whatever secret they buried. I spent the rest of the day creating mirrored copies of the USB data and mailing them, via separate, untraceable means, to trusted legal contacts in different states, my insurance policy. If I vanished, the truth would still surface. That night, I waited for Marcus. He finally arrived home near midnight, smelling faintly of expensive cologne and, strangely, salt water, an aroma inconsistent with his supposed client dinner. He was exhausted, but his eyes held that familiar, calculating glint I'd misread as confidence. I poured him a glass of scotch and, adopting the persona of the weary, loving wife, I asked him about his stressful week. He launched into a practiced, detailed account of market volatility and a crucial, late-night meeting with a fictional Japanese investor. I nodded, my smile fixed and brittle, pretending to absorb the complex financial jargon while internally cross-referencing his lies with the Cayman Islands shell company reports I just read. Just as he finished his fabricated story, he reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small, velvet jeweler's box, not unlike the one the sapphire bracelet came in. "Doreen," he sighed, "the picture of a tired but dedicated husband. I know I've been distant. I want to make it up to you." He opened the box, revealing a simple, diamond solitaire necklace, beautiful, but utterly lacking the personality he usually put into my gifts. "It's an apology," he said. I accepted it with feigned gratitude, but as I fastened the clasp around my neck, I noticed a tiny smear of bright red lipstick on the underside of his collar, a shade I instantly recognized. It was Savannah's signature, sultry siren. My blood ran cold, but I maintained my composure. Just as he began to relax, ready for sleep, I asked, casually, "Marcus, you never replaced the old clock in the study, did you? The one that stopped working after we put that heavy safe behind it?" His head snapped up, his exhaustion instantly replaced by an expression of sharp, guarded panic that lasted only a fraction of a second before he smoothly covered it with a slight cough. "The clock? Oh, I had that fixed months ago, darling. Why do you ask?" He replied, but his left hand had instinctively gripped the armrest of his chair, white-knuckled and tight, a gesture of high anxiety I knew meant a massive lie was escaping his lips. Why would a simple, broken clock, that stopped years ago, trigger such a severe and sudden protective reaction, and what on earth could be hidden behind that cheap, ornamental timepiece that Marcus feared I might discover more than the evidence of his affair and the existence of his hidden child? The broken clock was just another layer in the elaborate stage set they'd built for my benefit, and Marcus's sudden paralysis confirmed its importance. I let the subject drop, bidding him a cool good night, but my mind was already racing. While he slept soundly, convinced he had diverted my attention, I crept down to the study, the Janus key still heavy in my bathrobe pocket. I moved the heavy, ornate grandmother clock, which revealed a shallow wall safe hidden in the plaster. I used a slim gem to open the safe, the simple lock offering no resistance, and inside, nestled on black velvet, wasn't more money or documents, but a stack of old, thick manila files, each labeled with a date from approximately 25 years ago. The top file was titled, in Savannah's familiar, looped handwriting, "Doreen, Custody Agreement, 1998. My heart stopped beating entirely. 1998, that was the year my son, David, was born. David, my precious, only child, who now lived across the country, starting his own career. I snatched the file, my hands shaking so violently I nearly dropped the whole stack. I tore open the paper, ignoring the financial records, skimming straight to the legal text, in the matter of the transfer of parental rights for the child known as David. I read the names listed as the biological parents, Savannah Vanna, and a name I didn't recognize, a different, wealthy, much older man. And then, the name of the adoptive mother who had signed the documents, Doreen Johnson. The realization hit me with the force of a train crash. David was not my son. He was Savannah's son, given to me right after his birth because, as the document coldly stated, Savannah was, financially and emotionally unfit, to raise him and was paid a substantial sum by the biological father to relinquish all rights, and I had been the willing, loving adoptive mother who raised him as my own, never breathing a word of the truth. But that wasn't the twist. The twist was in the final paragraph, a late addendum, dated one day before the fake death. It stated that the original biological father had recently died, and due to a clause he put in his will before knowing about the adoption, David was now the sole beneficiary of an $80 million estate, provided he was raised by a single, living biological parent. If both biological parents were deceased, the money would go to charity. This meant Savannah's fake death was not about Marcus and their baby, but about securing her position as David's only living biological parent to access the massive estate. Her reappearance with Marcus and their new baby was merely a dangerous distraction, a new life she was building with the money she planned to claim through David's inheritance. But the ultimate shock, the one that made me gasp and clutch the document to my chest like a shield, was the final paragraph on the addendum, which detailed the conditions under which Savannah would re-enter David's life. It wasn't about love or motherly desire. It stated that Marcus, my husband, was the appointed executor of the estate, tasked with verifying Savannah's survival and ensuring the transfer of funds, meaning Marcus was not just her lover and accomplice, but the gatekeeper to the massive inheritance, and he needed her alive to execute the will. But he needed me quiet and unaware to retain his position as David's father until the money was secured. The cold realization was that Marcus and Savannah had partnered to execute a slow, agonizing legal long con, not just a romantic one. My adoption of David had accidentally made me the biggest barrier to their $80 million prize. I had raised a child that was the key to their fortune, and my death would simplify the legal process. Just as the weight of this terrifying realization crashed over me, the floorboards outside the study creaked loudly, and a shadow fell across the doorway, accompanied by a low, menacing voice that was definitely not Marcus's, demanding, "Drop the file, Doreen. You've read enough of what doesn't belong to you."